The desert wind slashed across the cracked earth like a blade carrying red dust and the metallic tang of blood that hadn't yet dried. The wagon cast a long shadow across the scorched trail, the sun dipping low behind them, like fire sinking into the dirt. Lillian gripped the reins hard with one hand, the other wrapped tightly around her 6-year-old son. Jesse trembled against her chest, his face buried in her blouse, tiny fingers clutching at the torn fabric, like he was afraid the world would break apart if he let go. "They're still coming, Mama," the boy whispered, voice barely audible over the thunder of hooves behind them. Lillian bit down on her lip until it bled. "Hold on, baby. Don't look back." 3 riders were closing the distance fast. Long dusters flapped in the wind, their silhouettes sharp and merciless. Everybody out here knew that name, the Grangers. Cutthroats and bounty hounds who killed for coin and pleasure, and now they were coming for Jesse for reasons Lillian understood all too well and could never speak aloud. A bullet cracked through the air and slammed into the side of the wagon. Jesse screamed. Lillian shouted down, just as the front wheel struck a half-buried rock with a jarring crunch. The axle snapped. In an instant, the wagon lurched sideways and tipped. Lillian flung herself over Jesse, bracing for the fall. Sand burned her skin as they hit the ground hard. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she didn't let go. Gasping, she shoved Jesse toward a nearby cluster of rocks. "Run now." The boy scrambled away, dusty and wide-eyed. Lillian spun back, lip-bleeding, dress-torn, eyes blazing. She drew the pistol from beneath her skirt, old but loaded. Her grip was steady. One of the riders dismounted and stalked forward, grinning. "You've got fire, lady," he sneered. "But the boy's coming with us. You'll have to kill me first," she said. He cocked his head. "Maybe I will." The click of his hammer sounded like the end. Then another shot cracked the air. It wasn't hers. The outlaw jerked back a hole blooming in his chest. He dropped. 2 more gunshots rang out fast and brutal. Another rider fell. The third wheeled his horse and fled into the fading light. Out of the settling dust rode a lone figure. Long coat, wide hat pulled low. The rifle still smoked in his hands. He dismounted like a ghost, stepping from the grave, and walked forward with calm, deadly purpose. Ethan Cain. Lillian rose slowly, pistol still in her hand, but lowered now, fingers slack. Her breath came hard and fast. Her mind reeled. From behind the rocks, Jesse peeked out, then ran. He threw himself between the stranger and his mother's arms, wide eyes wet with fear. "Don't take our mama," he shouted. And the world stopped. Ethan froze mid-step. His gaze dropped to the boy. Dirt-smudged cheeks, trembling mouth, fierce little eyes. And something inside Ethan shattered. That face, those eyes, his eyes. He looked past Jesse and saw her. Lillian. Bloodied. Bruised. Beautiful. 7 years gone. 7 years of chasing ghosts and waking to nightmares. She was still here. Still alive. And so was the son he never knew he had. The wind still howled through the rocks, carrying the bitter scent of gunpowder and the silence that always followed violence. Ethan stood, frozen eyes locked on the child who had just stepped between him and the woman he once called wife, as if those tiny outstretched arms had reached back through time and dragged his memories, screaming, into the present. Jesse stood firm, staring at the stranger, no longer a stranger, breathing hard cheeks streaked with dirt, eyes shining with tears, but steady. Lillian stepped forward, gently resting a hand on her son's shoulder. Her voice trembled. "Jesse, it's all right now. He's just a man who helped us." Ethan took a step back, not from fear, from the crushing weight in his chest. Lillian, he breathed her name like ash in his mouth. She flinched, hearing it spoken aloud for the first time in years. "Ethan," she whispered, not daring to believe her own eyes. He nodded, unable to speak further. Their eyes met, and in that moment, time cracked open. 7 years. 7 years since the fire turned their home to cinders. Since he clawed through ashes, calling her name, certain she had died. "Who is he?" Jesse asked, glancing up at Ethan with innocent curiosity. Lillian quickly stepped between them. "Just someone who helped us, sweetheart," she said softly, eyes never leaving Ethan. But Ethan wasn't looking at her anymore. He saw a glint of silver poking out from Jesse's shirt as the boy shifted. The desert sun caught on it. A small pendant in the shape of the letter D, worn down, dulled by time, but unmistakable. Ethan's breath caught. He stared at the boy, then at Lillian. "That," he said hoarsely, "that was mine. I gave it to you, our wedding gift." Lillian's grip on Jesse tightened. She didn't answer right away. Only the wind spoke, whispering through the rocks like it knew too much. "You kept it?" Ethan asked, needing something, anything to hold on to. "All this time, no," Lillian said, voice barely audible. "I gave it to Jesse." Ethan blinked. "Why?" She looked away. "Not because I wanted you to remember, but because I never forgot." Something inside Ethan cracked. Not anger, not rage, just something heavy and old and buried too long, the kind of pain that leaves no room for breath. He turned to Jesse, who stood watching them both, confusion and wonder clouding his small face. "The boy." Ethan's voice was tight. "Whose son is he?" Lillian didn't answer, but her eyes did. "Lillian," he said again, softer now. "I deserve to know." She took a hesitant step forward, then stopped. "And what about me, Ethan?" Her voice shook. "Do I deserve to know who you are now?" He swallowed hard. "No, I'm not the same man. That man died in fire and grief, but the one standing here, he survived. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't stand the thought that you'd disappeared without a trace." Lillian wrapped her arms around herself. "I did what I had to do. Not for me. For Jesse." The name hit like a blow. Ethan looked back at the boy. Those eyes. His eyes. Like looking into a reflection from a life he barely remembered anymore. Like the spring days before the fire. Like the soft yes she once gave him in a field of wild wheat. "The boy," he rasped. "He's mine, isn't he, Silence?" Then slowly, painfully, Lillian nodded. Just once. But it held the weight of 7 years of running. Ethan staggered a step back, arms hanging limp. He didn't cry, but his eyes brimmed with storms, the kind that roll in slow and never leave the land the same again. He looked at his son, the boy who had stood between him and a gun, who wore a piece of his past against his heart. And for a moment he didn't know whether to feel whole or broken beyond repair. Between them stood a child, wide-eyed still and unknowing at the center of 2 lives torn apart by fire, and maybe, just maybe, being pieced back together by something stronger. Inside the dusty outpost, twilight crept through the cracks in the old wooden walls, casting fractured shadows across Ethan Cain's bloodied and dirt-streaked face. He sat motionless against the splintered board's rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on a place that had no name. Lillian stood a few feet away, arms tightly crossed, her back to him. Jesse had fallen asleep in the corner, curled around the silver pendant on his chest, a quiet symbol of all they'd lost, and just barely begun to find again. "I need to know," Ethan said, his voice dry and rough as desert gravel. "I need to understand why." Lillian didn't turn. Understand what she asked, barely above a whisper. "That night," Ethan replied, eyes still lowered. "The night the house burned." A dry wind slipped through the gaps in the wall, brushing between them like a breath from the past. "I came home late," Ethan began, voice tight. "It was already dark. I saw the smoke from a mile out. I ran like hell. By the time I got there, it was already an inferno." Lillian turned slowly. "I ran through the back," Ethan continued. "Flames everywhere. I kicked in the cellar door. The blast knocked me back. Next thing I knew, everything was ash." He gave a hollow laugh, no humor, just emptiness. "They said they found burned cloth, said it was your dress, that no one could have survived. I believed them." Lillian inhaled sharply, eyes glistening. "I wasn't in that house," she said. "I left before it happened." Ethan looked up. Why, she stepped closer. slow and unsteady like every word she was about to say, was another wound opening. "I went to town," she said, "to get medicine. For you. You had that cough, remember?" Her voice cracked. "I was gone no more than 15 minutes. But when I came back—" She swallowed. "The whole place was on fire. I screamed for you." No one answered. Ethan clenched his fists, knuckles white. "I tried to go in," she said, voice trembling. "But someone from town grabbed me, dragged me back, said it was too late, that the house was gone, that no one could have made it out." Ethan stood up slowly, like the weight of the truth was pressing against his chest. "What happened after he asked?" Lillian's hands shook. "I stayed for a few days, but when folks realized I was alive, the rumors started. They said I must have lured the Grangers, that I was the reason they came. One old woman threw rocks. A man pulled me by my hair in the market and called me a traitor." Ethan's face hardened. "Jesus. I was pregnant, Ethan," she said, voice raw. "I had no home, no name, no one. Just him. I couldn't raise our son in a place that wanted me dead." Silence fell again. A silence heavier than any they'd shared before. Ethan stepped closer, each word like a stone laid on old ruins. "I searched for you," he said quietly. "I went from town to town, followed every rumor, chased every whisper. I never stopped, but I never thought. You were alive." Lillian looked at him, eyes brimming. "I came back after a few months, but there was nothing left, just an empty patch of land. No trace of you, no name on any grave. I thought you were gone." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "So I ran again, changed my name, buried everything. Except Jesse. Every time I looked at him, I saw your face." Ethan stared toward the far corner where the boy lay sleeping, chest rising and falling gently. One hand still clutched the silver E. "We lost each other," Ethan murmured. "Not by choice, but because the world ripped it from us." Lillian nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "But now," he said, eyes still on the boy, "we have him, and he needs to know the truth. He needs both of us." Lillian turned to him, not as a stranger, not even as the man she once loved, but as the piece of herself she had believed turned to ash, now standing in front of her, with blood on his hands and a son between them. The next morning, as the first light of day slipped through the warped wooden slats, the outpost remained hushed, except for the steady, shallow breathing of a boy recovering from fever. Jesse lay curled beneath a wool blanket, cheeks flushed, his damp hair sticking to his forehead. Beside him, Ethan sat against the wall, one hand holding a water canteen, the other gently pressing a damp cloth to the child's brow. Lillian stood in the doorway, holding a bowl of cooled broth, eyes locked on the two of them. She said nothing. There was no need. She simply watched the man who had once been her husband, now tending to the child with quiet care, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan spoke softly, not looking up. "He ran hot last night, but he's strong. Stronger than I ever thought possible." Lillian gave a small nod. She stepped inside, set the bowl down beside Jesse, then retreated again, still keeping her distance. A few moments passed before Jesse stirred. He let out a faint groan, eyes fluttering open. He looked up at the cracked ceiling, then slowly turned his head toward the man at his side. "Cowboy man," the boy whispered. Ethan smiled faintly, setting the cloth aside. "Yeah, I'm still here." Jesse blinked. "You didn't leave. I told you I wouldn't." The boy gave a small nod, then mumbled, "Mama said you're not a bad man." Ethan turned to glance at Lillian. She didn't speak, but there was something in her eyes, a softness that hadn't been there the night before. By noon, Jesse was sitting up at the small wooden table by the window, clutching a piece of charcoal in his little fist, scribbling across a crumpled page Ethan had pulled from his pack. Nearby, Ethan was hunched over Jesse's stuffed horse, stitching a torn leg with careful hands. "Mama tried fixing him 3 times, Jesse said, watching curiously, "but he keeps breaking." "Well, this is lucky number 4, Ethan replied with a quiet chuckle. "When I was your age, my PA made me one just like this." Jesse's eyes widened. "You had a papa too?" Ethan paused, then nodded. "Everyone starts somewhere, kid." He finished the last stitch and handed the patched horse back. "There. Good as new. He's ready for another adventure." Jesse hugged the toy close, then grinned and held up his drawing. "Look, on the page a woman with long hair, a boy with a stuffed horse, and beside them a tall man in a wide hat holding both their hands." Ethan stared. "That's us," Jesse said proudly. Ethan opened his mouth, but the words got caught in his throat. Before he could say anything, Lillian stepped forward and gently turned the drawing face down on the table. But Ethan had already seen it. That night, the lantern flickered low. Ethan sat near the fire, sharpening his knife slowly, thoughtfully. Jesse lay fast asleep, clutching a new wooden knife Ethan had given him, just before bed, carved by Ethan's own hand. Lillian sat near the door, watching. "That boy Ethan murmured, not looking up, has your eyes. But he smiles like me." She said nothing. Ethan reached down, gently lifted the edge of the blanket where Jesse lay. The boy was still asleep, one hand curled tightly around the wooden handle. "I made that last year," Ethan said. "Didn't know why. Just felt like I had to. For someone." Lillian moved beside him, adjusting the blanket over Jesse's shoulder. "He's never called anyone, Father." Ethan didn't answer. He just brushed the boy's hair back. "He can now," he whispered. From the dark, a quiet murmur rose, soft, unsure. "Papa." Ethan froze. Jesse remained asleep, but his lips had moved. The words still hung in the air. Ethan turned to Lillian. She met his eyes and gave a trembling nod. No one said a word after that. But in that tiny fire-lit room, with the scent of smoke still lingering and old boards groaning in the wind, something had been sewn back together. Not loudly, not all at once, but stitch by stitch, like a home being rebuilt out of what was nearly lost. That night, the desert fell into an eerie stillness, not peaceful, but expectant. Outside, the wind had gone quiet. Overhead, the crescent moon hung like a silver blade, sharp and distant in the dark sky. Ethan didn't sleep. He sat near the door rifle across his lap, listening to every sound, every shift in the air. There was something about the silence, something he'd learned after years on the run. When the world grew too quiet, it meant trouble was coming. Then, it came. The faint clatter of metal. He was on his feet in an instant. Moving to the window, he peeled back the ragged curtain just enough. Under the pale light, shadowy figures crept along the ridgeline, 6, maybe 7. He recognized their movement, lean and practiced. Hunters, predators. The Grangers had found them. "Lillian," he hissed, "get Jesse, get to the cellar, now." No questions, no hesitation. Lillian jolted awake, scooped Jesse from the blanket, still half asleep, and rushed to the trapdoor near the hearth. Ethan bolted the front door just as the first shot cracked the air, splintering the wood inches from his head. Gunfire thundered through the cabin. Dust rained from the beams. They weren't waiting anymore. 2 rushed the front. Another scrambled over the rear wall. More circled the sides. Ethan fired through the door, 1 went down. Another tripped the yucca tripwire and fell screaming into a bear trap. The sound of his cries pierced the night. But they kept coming. Glass shattered. Ethan spun and fired, took 1 down at the window. Then crash. The back door buckled. A man burst in and grabbed Lillian just as she was lowering Jesse into the cellar. "Let her go," Ethan roared. He fired and missed. The Granger held Lillian like a shield, dragging her toward the door. That's when Jesse reappeared, face-pale hands, trembling wooden knife clutched tight. "Leave my mama alone," the boy shouted. The outlaw laughed, cruel and careless, and kicked Jesse hard in the chest. The boy went down. Time stopped. Ethan saw red. He threw the rifle aside and charged. The outlaw turned, raised his weapon, but Ethan slammed into him full force. They crashed to the floor. A knife flashed, slashing into Ethan's shoulder. He didn't stop. He grappled, punched, tore the blade from the man's hand, and drove it into his gut. The man stilled. Ethan staggered upright, blood pouring down his arm. 2 more rushed in. He turned, shot 1 clean through the neck. The last one charged with a club. Ethan let him get close, drove into him like a bull, slammed him into the wall, and finished it with a bullet between the eyes. Silence. Only Jesse's crying broke the darkness. Ethan turned, stumbling, vision blurry. The boy ran into him, face wet with tears and dirt. "Papa!" Ethan dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around the child, pulling him close. "I'm here," he whispered, voice raw and shaking. Lillian crawled to them, arms around both of them, sobbing. "You're bleeding." Ethan gave a broken smile. "Not as bad as it looks." He took Jesse's hand, squeezing it tight, even as his own trembled. "You were brave," he whispered. "Braver than I ever was." Jesse pressed his small hand against Ethan's chest, clinging. Lillian cradled Ethan's head, kissing his temple, as blood soaked into her sleeve. Outside, the wind stirred again, but this time it didn't carry death. It carried something smaller, quieter, but far more powerful. The sound of a home being protected, of a father standing his ground, of love in its rawest form, choosing to bleed rather than let go. The room was unbearably still. Outside, the wind slipped through the bullet-torn walls, stirring dust and the thick scent of smoke and blood. Ethan lay on his back across the splintered floorboards, gasping for air. One hand pressed hard against the wound in his shoulder, blood soaking through the fabric and spreading fast. His face had gone pale beneath the dirt, lips dry and trembling, but still he tried to smile. Lillian knelt beside him, cradling his head in her lap like he might slip away if she let go. Her eyes were red, her breath catching with every second that passed. She wiped his forehead with a shaking hand, trying to ignore how cold he felt under her touch. "Stay with me," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please, don't close your eyes." Ethan looked up at her, a flicker of that old spark breaking through the haze. "You still look beautiful," he murmured, barely audible. "Shut up," she choked. "Don't say goodbye." Behind them, Jesse crept closer, his tiny hand wrapping around Ethan's bloodied fingers. His cheeks were streaked with tears and dirt eyes wide with fear. "Mama, is Papa gonna die?" the boy asked softly. Lillian didn't answer. Ethan turned his head toward Jesse, struggling to keep focus through the fog creeping into his mind. "Kid," he breathed. Jesse leaned in. Ethan blinked, forcing out the question. Are you mine?" The words hit like a gunshot, not loud, but final. Jesse looked toward Lillian. "Mama, am I his son?" She froze. Then slowly, she nodded. "Yeah," she whispered. "You are." Jesse turned back to Ethan, awe and confusion swirling across his face. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Lillian reached out and touched his cheek. "Because I was scared. Scared I'd lose both of you. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just running." Ethan let out a long, ragged breath. A tear slipped down the side of his face, not from pain, but from something deeper, something breaking open. He looked at Jesse with raw, aching wonder. "You're the reason I kept going," he whispered. "I didn't know it was you I was walking toward, but it was always you." Jesse sniffled. "I think I've been waiting too. I didn't know who, but now I do." Lillian reached down and placed Jesse's small hand inside Ethan's, then wrapped her own around them both. 3 hands joined like a promise. "I thought you were dead," she said through trembling lips. "And when I found out you were alive, I was too afraid. I carried your memory, raised your son, but I left behind the part of me that could forgive myself." Ethan looked up at her eyes, full of something older than pain understanding. He squeezed her hand as best he could. "Then let's stop running," he said softly. "No more yesterdays. Just now." Lillian nodded. The tears kept falling, but there was something in her face that hadn't been there before peace, or the beginning of it. The 3 of them held each other in the middle of the wreckage among spent shells and dried blood. But it wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a beginning. Ethan closed his eyes, resting against Lillian's shoulder. Jesse curled against his chest, and for the first time in 7 long years, Ethan Cain wasn't a ghost chasing what he'd lost. He was a father, a man forgiven, a man with something to live for. He was finally home. 1 month after that bloody night, the desert wind had changed its tune. It no longer howled like the cry of the lost. Now it hummed soft and low, like the land itself was learning how to breathe again. Down by a bend in the creek, a small cabin stood patched with fresh pine boards where bullet holes used to be. The burn marks had been scrubbed away. Smoke curled from the chimney each evening, and in the mornings the scent of mint and lavender drifted from the pots Lillian hung along the porch rail. Jesse rode in slow, clumsy circles on a young dun mare, his legs wobbling, his jaw set tight. Ethan leaned against the fence, arms folded, squinting under the brim of his hat. "You're holding the reins too tight," he called out. "You gotta let her feel your hands, not fight 'em." "She keeps turning left," Jesse yelled back, frustrated. "She's testing you," Ethan said with a grin. "Make her respect the right rein." From the porch, Lillian watched them with a basket of herbs and wildflowers cradled in her arms. Her sleeves were rolled, dirt smudged across her skirt, sun on her skin. But she looked radiant. "You sure he's ready for his own horse?" she asked, smiling. "He's 6, Ethan said, "and stubborn. He'll learn faster than I ever did." By midday, they ate together under the willow tree that bowed over the creek. Jesse told a wild story about how his horse could probably talk if they listened close enough. Lillian laughed. Ethan didn't say much, just watched the way his son's eyes lit up, and thought this is what living feels like. That afternoon, while Jesse napped on the porch bench, Lillian swept dust from the doorway. Ethan stepped inside and knelt beside the trunk under the bed. He pulled out a battered metal box, scarred, dented, heavy with history. Inside lay the Colt .45 that had followed him through 7 years of vengeance. Every bullet it fired had asked a question he could never answer. Every battle he'd fought was meant to bring justice, but somewhere along the way, the line between justice and survival had blurred. Now when he looked at Jesse gripping his little wooden knife each night before sleep, Ethan understood the real justice was here. Within these walls, in this child's breath, in the quiet strength of a woman who'd stayed. He closed the box, stood, and carried it out back. Lillian didn't follow, but she watched him from the doorway. Ethan knelt beneath the big willow, dug a small hole near its roots, deep, cool still. He placed the box inside, shut the lid, and covered it with soil palm by palm. When he was done, he sat back on his heels and let out a long, slow breath. It wasn't just a gun he buried. It was everything it had meant: rage, loneliness, fire. That night, Jesse woke with a sleepy murmur. Papa Ethan was already in the rocking chair. He scooped the boy into his arms, wrapped him in a blanket, and settled back into the chair, holding him close. Jesse nestled against his chest, warm and trusting. Lillian came out quietly with a cup of tea, then stepped behind Ethan, wrapping her arms around his shoulders, her chin resting gently on his good one. "This is home," Ethan whispered, his voice barely more than breath. Then he leaned toward Jesse's ear and said it again, louder, so the boy would hear. "This is home, son." Jesse didn't answer. He just sighed and curled closer. And Ethan knew he wasn't that wandering man anymore, chasing ghosts across dust and canyon. He had found what he thought he'd lost. Not in a town, not at the barrel of a gun, but in a child's arms, in the forgiveness of the woman he once thought gone forever. He had come back, not through force, but through the quiet courage it takes to love again and start again. The next morning, before the sun crested the ridge, the sound of a hammer echoed through the valley. Ethan stood beneath the porch awning, sleeves rolled up, nailing down loose boards on the barn door. Each strike wasn't rage anymore. It was rebuilding. It was a father's rhythm. Jesse ran through the yard wearing a hat way too big for his head, shouting like he was leading a wild Mustang herd no one else could see. Lillian laughed from the kitchen door, arms full of freshly cut herbs. Little things, maybe. But they made a world. No more gunshots. No more Granger names spoken. No more nights with Ethan sitting up, finger curled around a rifle's trigger. Now when he heard Jesse's laughter, or felt Lillian breathing softly beside him in sleep, he knew what he thought had burned down with their home still lived family. That afternoon, they sat by the creek where the water ran so clear you could see the stones roll under its surface. Jesse tossed rocks and counted the plop each one made. "I think we should build a chicken coop," Jesse said. Ethan grinned. "A coop, huh? And what does your mama think?" "She'll treat 'em like babies. Probably name every single one." Lillian gave him a mock stern look. "No names. But whoever lays the most eggs gets called Queen Cluck." Ethan shook his head, laughter shining in eyes that hadn't known light for years. Evening came, and they curled together on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket. Jesse dozed off between them, his head on Ethan's chest. Above them stretched the kind of western sky that made you forget your own name, deep blue-black, dusted with stars like silver grains. The night was warm and full of crickets like music for a life starting over. Ethan held Jesse a little tighter and whispered it again. "This is home." Lillian turned toward him, voice soft as cotton. "And we're glad you came back." Ethan didn't answer. He just held on. He used to think he didn't deserve any of this, that a man carrying ghosts, a man with blood on his hands, couldn't possibly build something whole again. But now, Jesse hugged him in sleep. Lillian touched him without fear. The porch had flowers growing where gunpowder once lay. It wasn't forgiveness easily given, but it was a choice to love again, to stay. Maybe you've known a man like Ethan Cain. Maybe you are Ethan Cain, carrying wounds. Nobody sees running from a fire, nobody understands. But if you've ever stood in the desert of your own life and whispered, "Is there anything left for me at the end of this road?" then remember this man, the one who lived, lost everything, and still chose to come home. Ethan didn't return victorious. He didn't win. He just didn't quit. And now, with a child's head on his shoulder, a woman's hand in his, and a porch he built with his own hands. Ethan Cain isn't some haunted outlaw. He's a father, a partner, a man who finally got off the trail. If your heart skipped when Jesse called him Papa for the first time, if you blinked back tears when a woman stood between the past and the future, choosing life. If you believe the best things in this world never come easy, then you're exactly where you need to be. This story isn't just about 6-shooters and sunsets. It's about love. Not the easy kind, but the kind that fights to stay alive. And if you find yourself saying, "Ethan Cain deserves this," then we'll ask you this. Where do you go from here? Maybe home, where you don't have to wear armor, where your heart can breathe again, where laughter tells you you've still got time. 10th story might have found its peace, but out there, someone else is still wandering, still hoping someone will touch their shoulder and say, "You're not too far gone. You can still come home." Thank you for riding with us through the dust, blood, and beauty of this Wild West journey. If you believe that even a broken heart can learn to love again, then saddle up and stay with us here at Wild West Love Stories. Because out here, love isn't the reward. It's the reason we make it through.